Chapter 1. The Quiet Man Who Endured. Carol Bryant learned early that panic was contagious. You could watch it spread in an emergency room. One scream turning into three, one bad decision multiplying like a virus. That was why, after 20 years as a paramedic, he moved slower than everyone else when things went wrong. Not because he didn't care, because he cared enough to stay steady. At 41, his body carried the quiet evidence of the job. A knee that clicked when the weather changed. A shoulder that never quite slept right. Scars he didn't talk about. He wore his uniform the way other men wore suits. Clean, precise, unadorned. No bumper sticker opinions. No war stories volunteered. Just competence. Christmas Eve was supposed to be lighter. It never was. The station smelled of burnt coffee and antiseptic, the kind of tired scent that came from too many hours stacked on top of each other. Carol checked the board and nodded once to himself. Double shift. Again. He hadn't argued it. He never did. Extra hours meant overtime, and overtime meant options. Options mattered when you live your life braced for impact. Bryant, his partner, said, tossing him a clipboard, "You're a saint for covering tonight." Carol gave a small shrug. Bills don't celebrate holidays. The younger guy laughed, not realizing Carol wasn't joking. He sat on the bench and retied his boots, fingers moving with muscle memory. Outside, the city was already dressing itself in lights and noise. Inside, the radio crackled with the low hum of things waiting to go wrong. Carol preferred it that way. Chaos, at least, was honest. It was quieter in his head than it used to be. That hadn't always been true. Once, years ago, he had believed that marrying Hannah meant joining her life. He hadn't understood that he was stepping into something already owned. The Mays family didn't welcome people. They absorbed them, reshaped them, decided how much space they were allowed to take. Hannah had grown up inside that gravity. She loved him, he believed that. But love didn't break chains it had never worn. They'd met before the money mattered. Or maybe before he noticed it. Dinners that felt like interviews. Smiles that didn't reach eyes. Questions that weren't questions at all. Jan Mays had shaken his hand once and held it just a second too long, measuring something invisible. "You'll do," the look had said. For now. Carol had learned to tolerate things then. Little comments. Casual humiliations disguised as tradition. He swallowed them the way he swallowed adrenaline, controlled, measured, never visible. When Emma was born, the calculus changed. Staying wasn't about pride anymore. It was about proximity. He could endure almost anything if it meant being there when his daughter woke up scared from a dream. If it meant packing her lunch. If it meant her knowing, without question, where home was. The Mays family didn't understand that kind of endurance. To them, restraint looked like weakness. Silence looked like permission. Old money had a way of believing itself untouchable. The Mays name opened doors, closed investigations, softened language. They didn't threaten. They implied. Their cruelty was never loud. It was curated. Linen napkins. Crystal glasses. Rules delivered with smiles sharp enough to cut. Carol saw it clearly now, though he hadn't always. The way Hannah folded when her father spoke. The way family gatherings felt less like celebrations and more like tests everyone pretended to pass. He kept his distance when he could. He worked extra shifts. Volunteered for holidays. Let them think what they wanted. At the station, the clock ticked toward evening. Carol checked his phone during a lull, the screen lighting up with a picture he'd set years ago. Emma missing her front tooth, grinning like she'd won something. 8 years old now. Too smart. Too observant. She was spending Christmas Eve with Hannah's family. Carol had argued gently, then not at all. Courts like balance. Compromise. He hated that word. It always seemed to mean someone smaller gave more. "You good?" his partner asked, noticing him staring. "Yeah," Carol said, slipping the phone back into his pocket. Just thinking. He didn't say about what. The first call came just after dusk. A minor accident, nothing dramatic. Carol moved through it with practice calm, voice level, hand steady. He spoke to patients the same way every time, clear, respectful, grounding. People trusted him quickly. They always had. Between calls, he cleaned equipment, restocked supplies. Routine was armor. Outside, snow began to fall, thin and wet, turning the city into something softer than it deserved. Another medic joked about Christmas dinners gone wrong. Someone complained about in-laws. Carol listened without contributing. There were things you learned not to share. He thought about Emma sitting at a long table, feet not quite touching the floor. He hoped she was laughing. He hoped she was being fed. He hoped, absurdly, that the mazes might behave better when he wasn't there to disdain. Hope was not a strategy. He knew that. Still, it crept in sometimes. The radio crackled again. Dispatch tones sharpened. A call stacking on top of another. Carol stood, already moving, body aligning itself with purpose. As he reached for his jacket, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He paused. It was just a moment, barely a breath. But in that space, everything he was: paramedic, husband, father, lined up behind one simple instinct. He pulled the phone out. Emma hadn't texted much lately. She preferred voice notes, emojis, things that felt alive. But now there was nothing waiting for him. No message, just silence and the familiar ache of distance. Carol typed quickly, thumbs steady. I love you. Be good. I'll see you tomorrow. He hit send, watched the message deliver, then locked the screen. Bryant, someone called. You're up. Carol slid the phone back into his pocket, pulled on his jacket, and turned toward the waiting ambulance as the siren began to rise. Chapter 2, The House Where Rules Replaced Love. The Mays Mansion never felt like a place where children were meant to breathe. It rose behind iron gates and trimmed hedges like a monument to itself, stone too pale, windows too tall, symmetry so precise it felt scolding. Every Christmas, the lights were white instead of warm, arranged by professionals who understood restraint as status. Nothing blinked. Nothing laughed. Emma pressed her forehead briefly to the car window as they pulled up, fogging the glass with a small circle of breath. She wiped it away with her sleeve the moment her mother noticed. Sit up, Hannah said, already unbuckling. And remember what we talked about. Emma nodded. She always did. Be polite. Don't interrupt. Say thank you. Don't touch anything unless you're told. And most important, don't embarrass anyone. The front door opened before they rang the bell. Mrs. Mays' smile appeared first, practiced and precise, like she'd rehearsed it in a mirror. The hug she gave Emma was light, her perfume sharp and expensive. There she is, Ruth Mays said. My, you've gotten thin. Emma didn't know how to respond to that, so she said nothing. Silence was safer. Inside, the house smelled like pine and something else, polish maybe, or money. Her shoes clicked too loudly on the marble floor, and she tried to step more carefully, shrinking herself with each footfall. Voices floated from the dining room, layered and confident. Jan Mays sat at the head of the table, exactly where he always sat. He didn't stand when Emma entered. He didn't smile either. His eyes moved over her like inventory. So, he said, voice calm and heavy, this is Carol's girl. Emma felt the heat rise in her cheeks. She hated being referred to that way, like she was an object misplaced. She looks ordinary, one of the cousins said with a laugh. I guess that's to be expected. Ruth sked lightly. Now, we don't choose our beginnings. Jan's mouth twitched. No, he said, but blood tells. Emma folded her hands in front of her, the way her father had taught her when she was nervous. Breathe in. Count. Breathe out. She looked at her mother, but Hannah was already busy helping Ruth adjust the table settings. Eyes down, movement small. The dining room was enormous, built to host gatherings that felt more like ceremonies than meals. Candles were arranged just so. Place cards rested on gold-edged plates. Emma found her name written in careful script at the far end, near the children she barely knew. Careful with that chair, Shane Mays said as she pulled it out. That fabric costs more than your father's car. A ripple of laughter moved around the table. Emma smiled weakly, unsure if she was supposed to. Her stomach twisted, but she sat anyway, smoothing her dress over her knees. Dinner began with the clink of silverware and quiet conversation about investments, about winter properties, about people Emma had never met. When she reached for her water glass, Ruth gently tapped her wrist. Wait, she said. We say grace first. Jan bowed his head. The room followed. Thank you, he said, for preserving our family, our name, and our bloodline. Emma didn't understand why the word bloodline made her feel cold. As plates were passed, Emma focused on being invisible. She chewed slowly, careful not to spill. When someone asked her a question, she answered softly, eyes down. "So," a cousin said, leaning across the table, "is your father still driving that ambulance around?" "He's a paramedic," Emma said quickly, then winced. Correcting adults was dangerous. "Yes, yes," the cousin waved. "Same thing. Must be exhausting work. He likes helping people," Emma said. The words slipped out before she could stop them. Jan's eyes flicked toward her. "Helping," he repeated. "That's one word for it." Another laugh, thinner this time. Emma felt her chest tighten. She thought of her dad's hands, steady, warm. The way he always listened like what she said mattered. She sat straighter. "He saves lives," she said. Not loudly, just clearly. The table went quiet in a way that felt deliberate. Jan set his fork down. The sound was soft, but it landed heavy. "Saving lives," he said slowly, "isn't the same as building something that lasts." Emma swallowed. He works really hard." Ruth smiled, but her eyes were sharp. "Sweetheart, we're sure he does. Hard work comes in many forms." Emma looked around the table. Everyone was watching her now, waiting. Her heart beat fast, but she remembered her father's voice telling her that being kind wasn't the same as being quiet. "He loves me," Emma said. "That lasts." For a moment, no one spoke. Jan leaned back in his chair, studying her like a problem he hadn't expected. "Love," he said, "isn't currency. It doesn't buy respect." Shane snorted. "Kids say the funniest things." Emma's hands clenched in her lap. She felt small, but she didn't feel wrong. "I just mean," she said carefully, "my dad is a good man." The word good seemed to irritate Jan more than anything else. His jaw tightened. He glanced down the table, then back at Emma. "Goodness," he said, "without discipline is rot." At that moment, one of the cousins shifted in his seat, elbow catching the edge of a plate. It tipped, teetered for a fraction of a second, and then the plate clattered to the floor. Chapter 3, 40 Minutes on Steel. The sound of the plate shattering hadn't even finished echoing when Jan Mays stood. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't curse. He didn't look angry in the way Emma understood anger. He looked inconvenienced, like a man whose evening had been disrupted by something small and irritating. "That," Jan said, folding his napkin with deliberate care, "is what happens when rules aren't respected." The cousin who had knocked the plate over froze, eyes wide. But Jan didn't look at him. His gaze moved instead, slow, precise, until it landed on Emma. "And that," he continued, "is what happens when children forget their place." Emma's heart began to pound. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Her hands trembled in her lap. Ruth rose from her chair and walked toward the kitchen without a word. Shane followed, already shaking his head with exaggerated disappointment. "This is embarrassing," Shane muttered. "Christmas of all nights." Emma looked at her mother. Hannah sat perfectly still, eyes fixed on the tablecloth, her face pale. She didn't look up. She didn't speak. Jan stepped closer to Emma. The room felt suddenly smaller. "You like your father?" Jan said. It wasn't a question. Emma nodded barely. "And you think defending him gives you the right to disrupt this family?" I was just..." Jan raised a hand. Emma stopped instantly. "Discipline," Jan said calmly, "is how children learn restraint." Ruth returned from the kitchen, carrying a shallow tray. She set it down on the floor beside the table. Metal clicked softly against metal. Emma leaned forward before she could stop herself. They were nails. Long, silver roofing nails. Clean, sharp, arranged in neat rows, points upward, like someone had taken time to make sure they were evenly spaced. Emma's breath caught. "Kneel," Jan said. The word hit her harder than a shout would have. "I'm sorry," Emma said quickly. "I didn't mean to kneel," he repeated. "On the nails." Shane crossed his arms, watching with something like interest. "It's simple," he said. "Do it properly, and we can move on." Ruth sighed as if put upon. "This hurts us more than it hurts you," she said, voice smooth. "But rules exist for a reason." Emma shook her head, small and frantic. "Please, I'll be good. I promise." Jan crouched slightly, so they were eye level. His voice dropped, controlled and cold. You will kneel, he said, and you will apologize for tainting this family's bloodline with disrespect. When you are finished, you may eat. The word eat lodged itself in Emma's chest. She was hungry. She had barely touched her food. She looked again at her mother. Hannah's lips were pressed together so tightly they'd gone white. Still, she didn't move. Slowly, Emma slid out of her chair. The floor felt cold through her stockings as she knelt. The nails glittered under the chandelier. Now, Jan said. Emma hesitated for a fraction of a second, just long enough to hope someone would stop this. No one did. She lowered herself onto the nails. The pain was immediate and sharp, stealing the air from her lungs. A sound escaped her before she could stop it. A small, broken cry. Quiet, Shane snapped. Don't be dramatic. Emma clenched her fists as the metal pressed into her skin. The points bit through fabric, through flesh. Tears blurred her vision, but she forced them back, breathing the way her dad had taught her. I'm sorry, she whispered. Louder, Jan said. And properly. I'm sorry for tainting the bloodline, Emma said, the words tasting wrong in her mouth. Minutes passed, or seconds. Tom didn't behave normally anymore. The adults returned to their seats. Plates were replaced. Wine was poured. Conversation resumed, forced at first, then easier. Emma rocked slightly, trying to find a position that hurt less. There wasn't one. Her knees burned, then throbbed, then went numb in a way that scared her more than the pain. Blood began to pool beneath her, darkening the marble floor. She stared at it, detached, like it belonged to someone else. Stop moving, Ruth said without looking at her. You'll make it worse. Emma nodded and held still. Her breathing came in shallow bursts. She repeated the apology again and again, each time quieter. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. Someone laughed at something unrelated. A glass clinked. A fork scraped against porcelain. Emma's arms shook. Her vision narrowed. How long has it been? One cousin asked. Shane checked his watch. 10 minutes. She's got time. Emma's head swam. She felt warm, then cold. Her knees screamed. She tried to shift her weight and nearly cried out. Food, she whispered. Please. Jan glanced at her briefly. When you've learned. She nodded, tears finally spilling over. She didn't wipe them away. She didn't have the strength. 20 minutes passed. Maybe more. The numbers stopped meaning anything. Her apologies slurred together. Her voice cracked. She tried to think of her dad, his smile, the way he always knelt to her level, but the image kept slipping away. Her body swayed. Sit up, Shane said. Don't slouch. Emma tried. She really did. The room tilted. The chandelier blurred. Her ears rang. Then her strength gave out. She collapsed sideways, her shoulder hitting the floor first, her knees tearing free from the nails as she fell. Her head struck the marble with a dull sound. For a moment, no one moved. Then Ruth sighed. Honestly, she passed out, someone said. Jan stood, stepping carefully around her small body. She'll wake, he said. Children always do. They resumed eating. No one checked her breathing. No one cleaned the blood. They stepped over her when they needed to pass, careful not to stain their shoes. Eventually, the candles burned low. One by one, lights were switched off. The room dimmed. Emma lay alone on the cold floor, blood drying beneath her knees as darkness settled around her. Chapter 4. The phone call no parent survives. Emma woke up because the cold hurt. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. The ceiling above her was unfamiliar, too high, too white. Her head throbbed with a dull, echoing ache, and when she tried to move, pain shot through her knees so sharply that she gasped and froze. The room was dark now, quiet, no voices, no clinking dishes, just the low hum of the house settling, like it was breathing without her. Her mouth felt dry. Her lips stuck together when she swallowed. She tried to sit up. The world tilted. She whimpered, then pressed a hand to her mouth, terrified the sound might summon someone. Her fingers came away sticky. Blood. Her heart began a race. She pulled her knees toward her chest instinctively, then cried out silently as the torn skin screamed in protest. She bit down on her sleeve to keep from making noise, eyes squeezed shut, tears leaking anyway. Don't cry. Don't cry. Dad says crying makes it harder to think. She forced her breathing to slow, just like he'd taught her. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Count the seconds. When she opened her eyes again, she noticed something glowing faintly near the leg of the table. Her phone. Relief hit her so hard it made her dizzy. She crawled toward it inch by inch, dragging her legs carefully, leaving faint streaks on the marble floor. Each movement hurt, but the fear of being alone hurt more. When her fingers finally closed around the phone, she clutched it to her chest like it might disappear. The screen lit up her face. 2:13 a.m. Her hand shook so badly she had to try twice to unlock it. The contact list swam in front of her eyes, but she didn't need to read the names. She pressed the one she knew by heart. It rang once, twice. Emma's breath hitched. What if he didn't answer? What if he was busy? What if, hey, Peanut? Her dad's voice came through the speaker, steady and warm, like nothing in the world was wrong. Emma broke. Daddy, she whispered, the word barely sound. Daddy, I'm scared. Carol Bryant was sitting at the station desk when the call came in, paperwork spread neatly in front of him. The tone of his phone was low, almost polite. He'd glanced at the screen, expecting nothing more than a sleepy check-in. The sound of Emma's voice stripped the room of air. I'm here, he said immediately. His voice didn't rise, didn't waver. Years of training locked everything dangerous away. I'm right here. Talk to me. I fell, Emma said. She sounded confused, like she wasn't sure which parts of the truth were allowed. My knees hurt. There's blood. Carol stood up slowly. Every movement precise. Deliberate. Okay, he said. That's okay. You're doing good. Are you alone? Yes, she whispered. It's dark. Listen to me, sweetheart, he said, already walking toward the lockers. I need you to stay awake. Can you do that for me? I think so. Good. You don't have to move anymore. Just talk to me. His partner looked up as Carol grabbed his jacket. Everything all right? The man asked. I need to go, Carol said. He didn't slow down. He didn't explain. The tone of his voice ended the conversation before it began. Daddy, Emma whispered again. I'm sorry. Those words landed harder than any scream. You don't need to be sorry, Carol said gently. Not for anything. Can you tell me where you are in the house? The big room, she said, with the long table. Carol closed his eyes for half a second. When he opened them, his face was blank again. Okay, he said. You're doing perfect. I'm coming to get you. He hung up only after making sure she was still breathing steadily, still answering him. He drove through the night with the same focus he used weaving through traffic with a patient bleeding out in the back. No wasted motion, no reckless speed. Just inevitability. The maze gates were locked. That didn't stop him. He parked a block away, approached on foot, slipped through a section of fence he noticed years ago during one of too many uncomfortable visits. The house loomed ahead, all stone and silence. Carol didn't knock. He used the side entrance, the one staff favored. It opened quietly. Inside, the mansion slept. He moved through it like a shadow, following memory, counting steps. When he reached the dining room, he saw her immediately. Emma lay curled on her side, phone clutched in one hand, eyes fluttering open and closed. Blood had dried dark against the floor beneath her knees. Carol didn't speak. He knelt beside her, slipped his jacket off, wrapped it around her gently. His hands were steady even now. I've got you, he whispered, so softly it barely existed. I'm here. Emma opened her eyes. Relief flooded her face, then exhaustion claimed it. She went limp against him. Carol lifted her carefully, avoiding her knees, cradling her like he had when she was small enough to fall asleep on his chest. He didn't look at the table. He didn't look at the chairs. He didn't look at the nails still arranged neatly on the kitchen tray. He left the way he came. At the hospital, the fluorescent lights were unforgiving. A nurse gasped softly when Carol laid Emma down. What happened? She asked. Carol met her eyes. She was forced to kneel on sharp metal for an extended period. The nurse's mouth tightened. Doctors came. Questions followed. Measurements. Photos. Whispered conversations just out of earshot. One doctor shook his head slowly as he examined Emma's knees. This wasn't an accident, he said quietly. The injury pattern is consistent with prolonged pressure on sharp objects. Carol nodded once. He already knew. The doctor hesitated. We'll have to notify CPS. I understand, Carol said. The man lowered his voice. You should know, families with influence sometimes complicate things. Carol didn't react. By the time Dawn crept into the parking lot, Emma was stable, sleeping. Carol sat alone in his car, hands resting on the steering wheel, staring straight ahead. Perfectly still. Chapter 5. A Man Who Decides to Think. Carol did not cry. He noticed that first, the way a medic notices a pulse, present, absent, steady. He sat at the small kitchen table in his house while dawn thinned the night outside, a mug of coffee growing cold in his hands, and waited for the wave people always talked about. The collapse, the shaking, the sound breaking loose from his chest. It didn't come. Emma slept in the next room, wrapped in clean sheets, her breathing shallow but even. Carol had checked on her 3 times already, adjusting nothing, just confirming reality. She was here. She was alive. That was enough to keep him still. Panic, he knew, was loud and useless. Panic made mistakes. He had seen men panic at crash scenes and turn survivable injuries into funerals. He had seen rage make fathers swing and lose everything that mattered. Rage would fail. Precision would not. Carol rinsed his mug, set it upside down, and walked down the hall to the spare bedroom. It had never been decorated. No bedspread chosen. No pictures hung. The room existed the way a contingency existed, and used but ready. He closed the door behind him and locked it. The drawer was at the bottom of the old desk, the one with the sticking rail. He knelt, slid a key from a chain around his neck, and turned it. The lock clicked softly. Inside were folders, legal pads, envelopes thick with copies. Everything labeled in his handwriting, neat and unemotional. May's properties, incident log, correspondence, photos, do not remove. Carol hadn't started this last night, or last year. He had started it the first time Jan Mays had smiled while insulting him and everyone else had laughed like it was normal. He had started it when he realized that wealth didn't just protect people, it trained them to be careless. He sat back on his heels and opened the first folder. Dates, addresses, names, small notes scribbled in margins. Tenant complaint dismissed. Inspector reassigned. Settlement sealed. Patterns emerged when you were patient enough to look. Carol took out his phone and scrolled to a number he hadn't used in years. It rang twice. Carol Bryant. A voice said, surprised and wary. I'll be damned. Jeremiah, Carol said. You still alive? A pause. Then a short laugh. Oh, that's you, don't I? 10 years ago, Jeremiah Blair had been bleeding out in the back of Carol's ambulance after a highway pileup. Carol had stayed calm when others froze. Had kept him alive long enough to matter. I need counsel, Carol said. Not conversation. Jeremiah's tone changed immediately. What happened? My daughter was tortured, Carol said, flat and factual, by her mother's family. Silence stretched. When do you want to come in? Jeremiah asked. I won't, Carol said. I need you to listen. I need you to tell me what's admissible, what's actionable, and what stays quiet until it doesn't. Another pause. Then, you already have something. Yes. Then don't move it. Don't show it. And don't warn anyone. I wasn't planning to. They hung up without saying goodbye. Carol made the second call before the echo of the first faded. Orlando, he said when the line picked up. His brother didn't bother with pleasantries. I heard you breathe and knew it was bad. What do you need? Orlando Long had a talent for finding things people buried on purpose. He lived 3 states away and had made a career out of moral flexibility. I need everything, Carol said. Properties, shells, favors, old bodies if they exist. A low whistle. You finally done playing nice? I was never playing, Carol said. I was waiting. Send me what you have, Orlando said. I'll start pulling threads. Carol ended the call and returned the phone to the table. Then he called Hannah. She arrived that afternoon, face tight, eyes already defensive. She looked past Carol immediately toward the hallway. She's asleep, Carol said. Sit down. Hannah hesitated, then sat. Her hands twisted together in her lap. They told me it was discipline, she said quickly. That she was disrespectful. That it was, Carol held up a hand. Not in anger. In finality. Don't, he said. Hannah stopped. He slid a folder across the table toward her. She didn't open it. You have 24 hours, Carol said. You will file for divorce. You will relinquish custody. You will cooperate fully with every investigation that follows. Her head snapped up. You can't just— I can, Carol said. And I will. Her voice shook. They'll destroy you. Carol leaned forward slightly. No, he said. They'll try to destroy me. And fail. Hannah's eyes filled. They're my family. They tortured our child, Carol said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. You stood there. Tears spilled over now. I was scared. So was she, Carol said. And she was 8. Hannah reached for his hand. He pulled it back. If you protect them, he continued, I will expose everything. Every document. Every witness. Every silence you helped keep. She looked at the folder like it might bite her. What if I do what you ask? She whispered. Then you get to live with yourself, Carol said. That's the only mercy I'm offering. Hannah nodded, broken and small, and left without another word. When the house was quiet again, Carol returned to the table. He opened a fresh legal pad, tore off the cover, and wrote the date at the top in clear block letters. Day 1. Chapter 6, Ammunition Hidden in Plain Sight. Carol treated the next weeks the way he treated a mass casualty scene. Triage first, emotion later. Mornings began with Emma's care. Bandages changed. Physical therapy appointments logged. Breakfast eaten slowly at the table. Conversation kept light. He let her talk when she wanted to talk, and let the silences sit when she didn't. At night, when she slept, he worked. The evidence started with medicine, because medicine didn't argue. Carol requested copies of everything: ER intake notes, physician observations, imaging reports, photographs. He read them the way he read vitals. Cleanly, without flinching. Words like consistent with prolonged pressure on sharp metal repeated across pages. Timestamps lined up. Injury patterns told a story that didn't care who the mazes were. When it was time for Emma's statement, he didn't rehearse her. He prepared her. You only answer what you remember, he told her gently. Not what you think anyone wants. She nodded, serious in a way that made him ache. A child advocacy specialist sat with them in a quiet room, painted in neutral colors. The recorder light blinked red. Can you tell us what happened? The woman asked. Emma took a breath. I knocked a plate over, she said. They said I disrespected the family. Her voice didn't shake. It was careful, factual. What did they ask you to do? They told me to kneel on nails and say sorry, Emma said. They said I could eat after. Carol kept his eyes on the floor, hands folded. He did not interrupt. He did not correct. He trusted the truth to stand on its own. While the official channels churned slowly, Orlando worked quickly. Emails arrived at odd hours. Subject lines bland. Contents devastating. Property. Shell transfers confirmed. Tenant complaints buried. Payoffs routed through law firm. Inspector rotation manipulated. Carol printed everything and filed it. Dates matched addresses. Addresses matched people. People matched favors. One message came later than the rest. Found something old. Real old. You'll want to see this. Attached were scans of police reports from 22 years earlier. A death labeled accidental. A fall from scaffolding at a redevelopment site. Name: Tomas Conley. Carol remembered the name faintly. A partner, Jan Mays, had stopped mentioning abruptly. Orlando followed up with a call. They buried it, Orlando said. Witness statements changed. One guy recanted after a week. The coroner amended his report. Why now? Carol asked. Because the witnesses are old, Orlando said, and scared less. Carol closed his eyes briefly. Give me what you can. Allies came next. Carefully chosen. Quietly contacted. The building inspector owed Carol nothing. That was why Carol called him. I'm requesting inspections, Carol said, placing the file on the desk. By the book. The inspector flipped through the pages, jaw tightening. You know whose properties these are? Yes, Carol said. That's why I'm here. The inspector leaned back, exhaled slowly. I'll schedule them. Journalists required a different approach. Carol didn't pitch outrage. He pitched documents. One reporter met him in a diner off the highway, notebook closed, eyes sharp. You're not asking me to believe you, she said. No, Carol said. I'm asking you to verify me. He slid copies across the table. She read. Then she read again. Jesus, she murmured. This goes back years. Longer, Carol said. Inspections began quietly and ended loudly. A building on the east side was the first to be red tagged. Structural issues. Mold. Electrical violations ignored through 3 administrations. Another followed. Then another. Tenants gathered on sidewalks, clutching notices, telling stories that sounded rehearsed only because they'd been waiting to be heard. CPS tried to keep things contained. They scheduled meetings, asked questions, promised follow-ups. Carol showed up every time. Calm, organized, prepared. A supervisor cleared her throat during one meeting. Mr. Bryant, you should understand that families with resources. Carol slid the medical reports forward. Then Emma's recorded statement. Then photographs. Resources don't change tissue damage, he said. The room went quiet. Phone calls increased. Lawyers circled. Silence broke in places it hadn't before. And then, on a gray Tuesday morning, Carol's phone buzzed. A single message from the reporter. It's live. Carol opened the link and read the headline once. Then again. He set the phone down on the table, folded his hands, and waited as the first news article went live. Chapter 7. When the Untouchable Bleeds. The May's name didn't fall all at once. It cracked. The first story had barely settled before the second wave hit, local outrage swelling into something louder, less controllable. Morning news segments replayed the same footage of condemned buildings, blurred faces of tenants speaking through tears, the word systemic abuse and institutional failure crawling across the screen like stains. By the end of the week, national outlets were calling. Old money rot. One anchor said, shaking her head solemnly. This isn't about one incident, another corrected. It's about decades. Carol didn't watch. He listened from the kitchen while making Emma toast, the television volume low, his back to the screen. The noise wasn't for him. It was for the world. He focused on the butter, spreading evenly on Emma's careful bites. Lawsuits multiplied the way bacteria did, quietly, then everywhere. Former tenants filed claims. Former employees followed. A nonprofit announced a class action before lunch. By evening, 3 civil suits named Jan Mays directly. Lawyers who once returned his calls immediately now asked for time. The Mays family attorneys held press conferences filled with words like misunderstanding and overreach. No one used the word innocent. Inside the Mays family, the fractures widened. Candace was the first to break. She had married into the family for security, for status, for the illusion of permanence. She had endured Jan's cold scrutiny and Shane's temper because she believed silence was the price of comfort. Then the stories went national. She called Orlando at midnight, her voice thin and urgent. I can't do this, she said. They're going to burn everything. Then step away, Orlando replied calmly. They won't let me. Orlando paused. Then bring matches. Candace arrived at the attorney's office the next morning with a tote bag and shaking hands. She didn't look at anyone until the door was closed behind her. I want immunity, she said. Full. The assistant district attorney leaned back. For what? Candace laughed once brittle. You don't know the half of it. She opened the bag. Recordings came first. Dinner conversations. Casual admissions. Jan's voice, unmistakable, speaking about bribes like they were tips. Financial ledgers followed. Copies she'd kept without knowing why. Numbers she'd never understood but always feared. Shell companies. Payoffs. Dates that lined up too cleanly to be coincidence. Then she played the last file. It was shorter than the others. Grainy. Old. Jan Mays' voice again, younger, sharper. He was going to talk, he said. I didn't push him. I just didn't stop him from falling. The room stayed silent long after the recording ended. The ADA closed the folder slowly. We'll need you to testify. Candace nodded, tears finally spilling. I just want out. The first arrest happened quietly. Shane Mays was leaving a private gym, earbuds in, phone pressed to his ear, when 2 unmarked cars boxed him in. He barely had time to look offended before he was face down on the pavement, hands pulled behind him. What is this? He shouted. Do you know who I am? No one answered. The second arrest couldn't be hidden. Jan Mays was taken from his office. Cameras already waiting as agents escorted him past glass walls and stunned employees. He adjusted his cufflinks on the way out, spine straight, expression offended rather than afraid. "This is absurd," he told the cameras, a misunderstanding fueled by hysteria. Behind him, an agent carried a box of files. Carol heard about both arrests from Jeremiah, who called with the clipped satisfaction of a man watching gravity reassert itself. "They're processing Shane now," Jeremiah said. "Jan's lawyer is asking for a statement window." "Let him talk," Carol said. He hung up and sat for a moment, hands folded, listening to the refrigerator hum. He felt no rush of triumph, just a tightening like something aligning properly for the first time. Then he dialed a number he hadn't planned to. Shane answered on the third ring, breathless, furious. "Who the hell?" "It's Carol," Carol said. Silence. "You don't get to call me," Shane snapped. "This is harassment." "No," Carol said. "This is a courtesy." Shane laughed, sharp and ugly. "You think you won? This isn't over." Carol let the words sit. "I told you once," he said evenly. "You remember?" Shane's breathing grew louder. "I said I wouldn't hurt you," Carol continued. "I said I'd dismantle you." "You're bluffing," Shane said, but the word lacked conviction now. Carol glanced at the clock on the wall. "They're going to ask you about the nails," he said. "About who arranged them." Shane swallowed. "I didn't. And then they'll ask about Tomas Conley," Carol said. "And why your father kept paying a man who'd supposedly died in an accident." The line went dead quiet. Carol lowered his voice, not in threat, but in certainty. "This is the last time you'll hear from me," he said. "Everything after this belongs to the law." "You ruined us," Shane whispered. "No," Carol said. "You did." He ended the call. Outside the courthouse, reporters shouted questions. Flashbulbs popped. Jan Mays was guided down the steps, his composure finally cracking as he spotted the cameras. Inside, metal closed around wrists. The sound was small. Final. Handcuffs clicked shut. Chapter 8. The courtroom that listened. The courthouse had never held so many people who didn't belong there. Cameras crowded the steps each morning. Reporters speaking into microphones with practiced gravity, strangers lining up just to say they'd witnessed something historic. Inside, security lines stretched longer than usual, the metal detectors chirping steadily as if even the building itself were nervous. Justice, when it finally arrived, always drew an audience. Carol arrived early every day. He sat in the same seat on the same bench, posture straight, hands folded loosely in his lap. He wore the same dark suit. Nothing expensive, nothing careless. He did not look at Jan Mays when a man was brought in, though he could feel his presence the way you felt a storm through pressure changes. Jan looked smaller without his office, without his house, without the quiet machinery that had once moved at his will. Still, he carried himself like a man expecting the world to correct its mistake at any moment. The judge entered. The room rose. Silence fell heavy and deliberate. The first witness was the widow. She walked to the stand slowly, gripping the rail as if it were the only solid thing left in the room. Her hair had gone fully gray since the day her husband died, but her voice, when she spoke, was steady. "Tomas was careful," she said. "He knew those sites. He knew January." The defense attorney tried gently at first. "Accidents happened. Men slipped. Memory faded." Her eyes hardened. "My husband told me he was scared," she said. "He said if anything happened to him, it wouldn't be an accident." The courtroom leaned forward as one. Next came the medical experts. They spoke in measured tones, using words stripped of emotion. Injury patterns, duration, force. "The wounds are inconsistent with a single moment of contact," one doctor explained, pointing to photographs displayed briefly, respectfully. "They indicate prolonged pressure on sharp objects." The defense objected. Overruled. Carol didn't look at the images. He didn't need to. When it was his turn, he walked to the stand without hesitation. He raised his hand, took the oath, and sat. The prosecutor's questions were simple. "State your profession." "Paramedic," Carol said. 20 years. "Were you on duty the night your daughter was injured?" "Yes." "Did you treat her injuries?" "No. I transported her." "What?" "Because I am her father. Carol said evenly. And because objectivity matters. A murmur rippled through the room. The defense approached cautiously. Mr. Bryant, the attorney said, isn't it true you harbored resentment toward the Mays family long before this incident? Carol considered the question. I harbored awareness, he said. Resentment implies impulse. This was observation. The attorney frowned. So you planned this. I prepared, Carol corrected. Preparation is not a crime. The attorney tried again. You're trained to remain calm in emergencies, correct? Yes. So you admit you felt nothing when this happened? Carol met his gaze. No, he said. I felt responsibility. That answer ended the line of questioning. When Hannah was called, she barely looked up. Her testimony was brief, shallow. The truth had already outrun her. Ruth Mays never took the stand. Her lawyers settled the civil matters quietly, assets frozen, accounts drained by judgments that didn't care about pedigree. Jan testified last. He spoke of misunderstandings, of discipline taken out of context, of a society too eager to tear down success. The prosecutor played the recording. Jan's voice filled the room, younger and unguarded. I didn't push him. I just didn't stop him from falling. Jan's mouth opened, closed. The jury didn't look away. Closing arguments felt almost ceremonial by then. The evidence had stacked too high, too clean. The jury deliberated longer than anyone expected. Not because they doubted, because weight demanded care. When they returned, the room stood again. On the charge of first-degree murder, the foreperson said, voice firm, we find the defendant guilty. Jan did not react. On the charges of aggravated child abuse, she continued, we find the defendants guilty. Shane swore softly under his breath. Sentencing followed swiftly. Jan Mays, the judge said, you were sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. A gasp escaped somewhere in the gallery. Shane Mays, you were sentenced to 20 years. Shane's shoulders sagged. Hannah Bryant, the judge said, you are hereby stripped of custodial rights pending mandatory treatment. Hannah bowed her head. Carol felt Emma's small hand tighten around his finger. She had not once looked toward the defense table. She never would again. The judge surveyed the room one final time. This court has listened, he said, and it has spoken. The gavel rose. The gavel struck. Chapter 9, The Quiet After the Storm. The city moved on as if nothing had happened. News crews still ran segments in the evenings, dissecting the Mays case, debating morality and justice in measured tones. Headlines questioned Carol Bryant. Hero or vigilante? Social media erupted, some calling him cold, others calling him righteous. Every article quoted the same details, the same images of red-stained knees and ruined mansions. Carol did not read them. He brewed his coffee, black, in the same chipped mug he'd used since his first paramedic shift. He sipped it slowly while reviewing the day's schedule. Calls, shifts, patience. Emergencies that demanded attention, not judgment. The weight of news cycles and opinion polls held no power over him. Emma padded into the kitchen barefoot, hair damp from her shower. Her knees were scarred, pink and shiny under the bright morning light, but they flexed, moved, and held her weight steadily. She smiled at him, not a big grin, not a laugh that demanded attention, but a quiet acknowledgement of being alive. Good morning, she said, voice bright with deliberate cheerfulness. Morning, Carol said. Breakfast? Cereal is fine, she replied. She perched on the counter, swinging her legs lightly. He set bowls on the table. No words about the past, no lectures, no overprotection. The house felt deliberately neutral. Safety meant routine, not reminders of horror. Therapy sessions had become part of their rhythm. Physical therapy first, then occupational therapy, sometimes speech or emotional check-ins. Emma practiced movements with quiet determination, lifting her weight over stairs, balancing, walking carefully on uneven surfaces. Carol watched, never hovering too close, never leaving her alone for long. Try bending slowly, the therapist said, demonstrating on her own knee. Emma mirrored her movements carefully, wincing once, then smiling faintly. Better, the therapist said. You'll get stronger every day. Carol nodded, squeezing Emma's shoulder lightly after the session. See? stronger than before. They returned home. Lunch was simple, predictable. Carol cut sandwiches while Emma recounted the small victories of her day. She spoke of a classmate who asked her to play a game, of drawing a picture of their cat at home, of the way the sunlight fell across the playground slide. "Did you tell them about your knees?" Carol asked gently. "No," Emma said. "I didn't need to know. I'm okay now." "Good," he said. Evenings followed the same steady cadence. Homework, quiet reading, preparing simple dinners, a walk if the weather allowed. Stability was their sanctuary. Safety came not from fences, locks, or threats. It came from knowing that Carol was always present, calm, and measured. He returned to the station on his shifts with the same clinical precision as always. Patients still screamed. Cars still crashed. Lives still hung in balance. Carol worked, drove, lifted, stitched, and comforted. The adrenaline and responsibility felt familiar, grounding. No story, no media debate, no article could disrupt the rhythm that saved lives. Sometimes during long nights, he would catch glimpses of Emma in his mind. Kneeling, bleeding, terrified. He did not let it consume him. He did not rage or weep. He used it instead, a quiet reminder of focus. Focus meant preparedness. Focus meant control. Emma's emotional recovery progressed in increments. She learned to trust people again, to speak without fear, to assert boundaries and expect them to be honored. She started drawing again, a habit she had abandoned after the incident. Her sketches were careful and precise. Houses, trees, sunlight streaming between branches, figures holding hands safely. Carol encouraged her with quiet praise. "I like the way you drew the light," he said one evening, watching her color between lines with meticulous care. Emma looked up, a small smile forming. "It's supposed to be safe." "That's good," he said. "It should always feel safe." New routines built invisible walls around them. Weekends were dedicated to the park, trips to the library, and afternoons spent preparing meals together. Carol taught Emma to cook, measure, and organize. They learned to fold laundry, balance checkbooks, and plan weekly schedules. These tasks, ordinary and mundane, became tools of stability. Even bedtime had structure. Lights dimmed at the same hour, stories read aloud, Emma tucked in with the blanket folded just so. Carol lingered at the doorway, watching her chest rise and fall, listening for her steady breathing. When he finally left, he did not check the locks again. She was safe, and the routines reinforced it. One night, after a long shift, Carol sat at the kitchen table alone. The station was quiet. The neighborhood slept. He poured a glass of water and stirred it absent-mindedly. He thought briefly of the mazes, of courtrooms and handcuffs, of headlines and debates. But none of it demanded his attention. It had happened. Justice had been served. The rest was noise. Emma's laughter echoed from upstairs as she recounted a story to a stuffed animal. Carol allowed himself the smallest smile. Quiet, private, sufficient. He checked the calendar on the wall. Days marked routines, appointments, and therapy sessions, all of them uninterrupted by chaos or malice. The pattern of their lives was finally predictable, finally unbroken. Morning light came earlier now. Sun streamed through the kitchen window, soft and golden. Carol refilled coffee. Emma appeared in the doorway, wearing mismatched socks, hair curling around her ears, eyes bright. "Ready for breakfast?" he asked. She nodded, hopping down the stairs two at a time. "Yes." Carol set the table as she moved to her chair. He paused to watch her sit comfortably, knees healing, posture unguarded, expression unafraid. This was her life now. The public could debate morality endlessly. Reporters could dissect every decision. Opinion columns could argue about vengeance and justice. Carol ignored it all. He measured his days, not in victories or judgments, but in moments like this. A child smiling without fear, a routine followed without anxiety, a house filled with safety rather than silence or dread. And the world moved on around them, irrelevant to the quiet sanctuary they had built. 1 year passed. Chapter 10, The Victory That Didn't Need Noise. The mansion had become a ghost. Carol parked a block away and let Emma hop down first, her small hand slipping into his. The house loomed in the late afternoon light, silent and empty, the manicured lawns overgrown where gardeners had abandoned their posts. A for sale sign leaned crookedly near the driveway, its letters faded from sun and rain. Even the gates were rusted, unkempt, incapable of imposing authority anymore. Emma stared at the house for a long moment. She didn't speak, didn't cry. Her knees were steady now, unshakable. Her hands held the stone she had picked up from the driveway, smooth, round, ordinary. "Ready?" Carol asked softly, crouching to meet her eye level. She nodded, gripping the stone tighter. "Remember," he said, voice calm, precise, "it's not anger. It's closure." Emma's lips curved into the tiniest smile. "Closure," she repeated, testing the word. Then she raised the stone and threw it. The glass window by the front door cracked sharply, splintering into shards that fell like rain. Emma's eyes widened. Then, finally, the first genuine smile broke across her face, unguarded and light. Carol didn't speak. He didn't need to. The sound of breaking glass and her laughter said everything. She threw another stone, then another, and with each strike, more shards fell. The empty house seemed smaller now, less threatening, less eternal. With each sound, Emma's confidence grew, the echo of the past retreating slightly further. "Enough?" Carol asked after a moment. Emma shook her head. "No, one more." He stood beside her silently, hands in pockets, allowing her the ritual. Finally, she dropped the stone. Her chest rose and fell with a deep, even breath, eyes scanning the shattered glass and cracked reflections. "I did it," she whispered. "Yes," Carol said, simply. "You did it." They turned from the house together. Carol noted the rusted sign, the empty driveway, the fallen shutters. It had all been stripped of its power. He had won without shouting, without revenge that screamed, without the kind of theatrics the media would have loved. The quiet precision of patience had accomplished it all. Walking back to the car, Emma leaned against him. "Can we come back next year?" she asked. "If you want," Carol said. "But it won't be the same." "That's okay." She nodded, eyes thoughtful. "I like it better this way. Quiet." The drive home was slow. The streets held their normal rhythm. Children walking from school, neighbors tending gardens, a world that had moved on. Carol's mind wandered, not to hatred, not to triumph, but to reflection. He thought about the man he had been. Calm, patient, focused. He had endured the unbearable, witnessed the cruel, and responded with meticulous thought. He had become someone different, a man shaped not by impulse, but by calculation, tempered by moral certainty. Emma slept lightly in the passenger seat, head resting against the window. Her face was serene, untouched by fear. Carol glanced at her, feeling the weight of the year behind them and the unspoken promise of the years ahead. Back at home, they entered quietly. Dinner was simple. The routines that had built her safety over the past year continued seamlessly. Carol watched her set the table, organize the napkins, pour water with care. She was growing, stronger in body, mind, and spirit. Afterward, she disappeared into her room with a book. Carol stood at the doorway, listening to the low rustle of pages, the occasional giggle when she read aloud a word she enjoyed. He smiled faintly. The world could be loud, chaotic, and cruel, but inside these walls, calm prevailed. Later, he sat alone in the living room, staring at the dim glow of the lamp. Reflections of the past year drifted in his mind like shadows. He remembered the nails, the silence, the way Emma had called him that night. He remembered every calculated move, every quiet phone call, every inspection, every document gathered. He also remembered his own hands, steady, unshaken, uncompromised by hysteria. He had been a father, a protector, a strategist. And when the law faltered, he had acted with patience and precision. Carol exhaled slowly. He had changed. He accepted that. He had become someone different than he once was. And yet, despite the transformation, he felt no regret, no apology. None was needed. The work had been necessary. The justice had been thorough. Emma emerged from her room, blanket draped around her shoulders, hair messy, but eyes bright. "Good night, Dad," she said, voice soft. "Good night, Peanut," he replied. He lingered at the doorway, watching her disappear beneath the covers. The house was still, safe. He moved to his own room, pausing briefly by the window to glance at the moonlight spilling across the yard. The world outside remained oblivious, but within their small universe, victory had been claimed quietly, efficiently, without need for applause or acknowledgement. Carol lay down on the bed, feeling the exhaustion of the past years settle into his muscles. He thought of the mazes, of the courtroom, of the evidence compiled so meticulously, and of the small, decisive moments that had shifted power into his hands and delivered justice. He smiled faintly, not at triumph, but at certainty. He had acted when it was necessary. He had protected the one person who mattered most. He had reclaimed control over chaos. And if the need ever arose again, he knew exactly what he would do. He would do it again.